My father-in-law spanked me, and my husband thinks it's funny. I'm freaking out and rethinking our relationship. What should I do? I've always known my father-in-law Phil as a cranky and senile old man who often makes distasteful comments and jokes. I've tried to be understanding, chalking it up to his age and background, especially since my husband warned me early on to ignore him. But things finally went wrong when I stayed at his place to help him recover from a leg injury. Initially, everything was fine despite some challenges. However, a couple of nights ago, we got into an argument about his diet. The doctor had advised against certain foods and drinks during his recovery, but he insisted on having them. When I tried to stop him, he started yelling, "Do not talk back to me, girl, and I can do whatever the fuck I want in my house." Frightened by his outburst, I apologized and tried to leave, but he lunged at me, grabbed me, and held me down. Despite his age and injury, he's a big man, 6'2", and I'm quite small, under 100 pounds. I was terrified because I knew I couldn't physically stop him. Then he started spanking me forcefully, yelling at me the entire time. I was so scared and in so much pain that I just kept apologizing and crying, hoping it would end. Eventually, he let me go, but made me stand facing the wall. I felt utterly powerless and humiliated, but my fear of him doing it again kept me from running away. When he finally allowed me to leave, I ran to my room and called my husband, crying and shaking. His reaction shocked me. He chuckled and said, "Oh, yes, he used to spank us growing up." He genuinely didn't see the difference between spanking his own children and assaulting his grown daughter-in-law. He dismissed it, saying, "He's just a crazy old man," and told me to forget it happened. I insisted he talk to his father, but I doubt it will help. My Phil has continued to taunt me, saying things like, "That's what you get for being a bichichi," and threatening to spank me again. I've been walking on eggshells, terrified he might follow through on his threats. I asked my husband to come pick me up immediately, but he said he couldn't come until Monday, which is earlier than planned but still leaves me here for several more days. My Phil's taunts have made these days unbearable, and I've just been doing whatever he tells me to avoid another incident. I'm seriously rethinking my relationship. My husband doesn't seem to grasp the severity of what happened. I'm also worried about our future children and how he might react in a similar situation. I'm not sure what to do. Is it possible my husband just doesn't see the seriousness of this situation? Can he change if I help him understand? Entitled parent demands my seat because she didn't book one for her child. This happened a couple of years ago, but I can't get it out of my head, so I thought I'd share it here. Okay. To start with the story, my family lived across the country back then, so I would usually buy a flight to get there. Well, this was during the holidays, so everything was backed up, and there were a lot of storms. When I got to my first layover, my flight was canceled, and they couldn't get me a hotel, so I slept on the airport floor that night, clutching all my bags. By the time I got onto the plane, I had spent 24 hours in the airport. Luckily for this flight, I had booked first class, so I get on the plane, get comfy, and I'm just so happy that I'll be home soon after the last couple of days I had. Then a really nice flight attendant comes over, points at the empty seat next to me, and tells me a mother forgot to book her toddler's ticket and she was wondering if they could take my seat and the empty seat next to me. I told her that I'm sorry, but I've had a really long day, and I paid extra for the seat. I would like to stay. The flight attendant was very nice and said no problem, but she let the woman come sit in the empty seat next to me with her toddler on her lap. She immediately looked at me with a scowl and said, "I can't believe you wouldn't trade your seat for a kid." I simply told her, "Ma'am, I paid extra for this seat. You should have booked him a ticket. This isn't my fault." Then she kept muttering things under her breath and to her toddler, as if I couldn't hear her. She told her kid to make the most noise he can do whatever he wants, and she kept making comments towards me. I couldn't believe this entitled woman. I finally lashed out and said, "Will you shut the fuck up?" I'm not proud of myself for this, but after the last couple of days, I didn't care anymore. My common sense returned, and I apologized for swearing in front of her kid, even though I heard her call me a bitch and other names. Again, the woman wouldn't shut up. Finally, my savior, a really nice flight attendant, came over and bent down to the woman's level, saying, "Ma'am, you were lucky to be able to switch seats. All I've heard from you since you switched is you threatening this woman and telling your child to be noisy. This plane hasn't left yet, and we have no problem kicking you off this flight. If you continue to behave this way while we're in the air, you will be banned." I couldn't help but smile as she finally shut up. I was so glad that I had downloaded Sex Life on Netflix so I could finish my steamy show right in front of her. My husband put trash in a homeless woman's bucket instead of money. This is something that happened just 5 days ago, so absolutely nothing has been resolved. And that's why I'm here explaining this situation. My husband, I'm 33, put trash into a homeless woman's bucket instead of money. My husband and I like to travel a lot. We were recently traveling to Los Angeles, California, and while we were there, we immediately took note of all the homeless people lining the streets. I know LA has a reputation for homelessness, drugs, and crime, but it's safe to say we were both very surprised at what we saw there, especially my husband. My husband firmly believes that everyone can pull themselves out of dark places and homelessness with enough effort. I agree with many of the things he says, but he can often get extremely cruel when talking about these people, almost to the point of not even treating them like humans, which is exactly what happened while we were in law. My husband and I were walking in downtown LA during the day, not the safest place to be, I know. We had passed many homeless people, but we just ignored them, despite me feeling genuinely sorry for a few of them, until one woman seemed to push my husband over the edge. She was holding a sign and standing next to a tent, asking everyone who passed for money to support her family. Most people just ignored her. She said the same thing to us, except for some reason, my husband stopped walking and turned to look at her. I was obviously extremely uncomfortable and actually had to turn around and walk back a little because I wasn't expecting my husband to stop. My husband told her, and I'm 90% sure this is what he said, "Shut your fucking mouth, stop asking everyone around here for a handout and get a fucking job." I feel extremely sorry for your children. What kind of example are you setting for them? That it's okay to beg for money? You're all parasites to this fucking street. He then proceeded to grab a few wrappers and plastic bottles out of my backpack and put them into the woman's bucket. The woman didn't say anything and just went back into her tent with the bucket. I was extremely shocked and honestly a bit scared of my husband in that moment. I asked him why he would say and do something so cruel, and he continued to tell me these people are ruining this country and that almost all of them are capable of working or doing something along those lines. I told him I completely agree, but I kept asking why he put our trash in her bucket or why he had to curse her out publicly on the street. My husband told me he's hoping that what he did will motivate her to get a job and realize her situation.